it was very clear talking with the panellists that most of them wanted to talk about Christchurch. And who can blame them? I mean, that is exactly the question that is exercising everybody's mind is, what do we remember about this city? What can the city become? You know, can we recreate any of those memories? How will they be captured? And I've been thinking a lot about memory myself, and to me it seems it's quite a different thing from history. And given that I work now for an organisation whose dominant focus is history, I'm going to throw this quote in because it probably isn't quite Historic Places Trust material, but I think it's important to this discussion and to thinking about what happens here in the future. It's by Caroline Wilkinson, and she says, "An obsession for historical accuracy or detail does nothing to secure or guarantee familiarity with the intricacies of previous lived experience." And it seems to me previous lived experience is where memory sits. So I'm going to just put that as my starting contribution and welcome our first speaker, who is Jonathan Mane Wheoki, who's head of the Elam School of Fine Arts in Auckland, and before that he was Director of Art and Collection Services at Museum of New Zealand, Papatongarewa, and before that was Senior Lecturer in Art History and Dean of Music and Fine Arts at the university here. So he's very familiar with Christchurch's architecture and history. He's a historian of art and architecture, but also I think many of us from the art world in particular will know him as a pioneer in the promotion of contemporary Maori and Pacific art and art history. So please welcome Jonathan Mane Wheoki.
E nā rangatira ke te mihi ki a koutou katoa reira tēnā koutou kia ora tātou katoa kia ora. Tēnā koe Priscilla, e te tepu ke te mihi ki a koutou reira tēnā koutou kia ora tātou katoa kia ora. The city as history. It's a poignant topic, obviously, and it's one that tears at my heart as somebody who has a deep love of Christchurch and Canterbury going back many, many years. So this was a good opportunity for me to think about the city, but probably not to talk about it, but to address the topic itself and to think about what that concept, what that statement, the city as memory, might be. Certainly my mind flew to the city in history, the famous study by Lewis Mumford that was a textbook for many, many years. I thought about that. I thought about the city in prehistory, which we may come to very shortly. But it is the city of memory that is the topic I'll be addressing in the next few minutes. Well, the city as memory is first and foremost a place of the mind. It's a place of the heart and of the soul. The city as memory is the sum of all the sensory experiences and impressions that are registered in your memory bank, registered from your physical engagement with place. It comes from what you know or have learned about that place. It is not a fixed place. Rather, it is an ever-shifting, constantly changing, moving entity. The city as memory is a personal and private place, unique to each individual. And it is also a place of collective memory, of shared experiences, of big civic moments, events, shared by groups or communities or populations. Catastrophic events like earthquakes, events and other national disasters, and shared experiences at agreed civic places of remembrance, such as the chalice here, which was chosen by the people of Christchurch. It was not given to the people of Christchurch as a place of remembrance. It was chosen by them to commemorate that terrible event in New York 10 years ago, and a few weeks later, the murder of Sir Peter Blake. Places of remembrance and also gathering places such as the fan zone for the opening of the World Cup, which I fled to last night just to witness that spectacular. It is the city as memory that you take to other cities, which you then use for purposes of comparison and measurement with the city you know, to mark the departures and differences from the city you know, the city you remember. It is the city you know that you can conjure up when you engage with other cities and want or need to know how they work, how to read them. You assume that such cities are physically defined or contained entities, and that all parts of it relate to the whole, that all parts of the entity relate to a physical centre, and that there are governing or controlling authorities that are responsible for the infrastructure. Such cities in history are at least 9,000 years old. This is one city that purports to be perhaps the first such city with an expansive population and an infrastructure. You assume that for every inhabitant of a city, it is a place of the mind and of the heart and soul, around which people construct their own identities as citizens belonging to that place. The city as memory is the place you consult when you are wanting to understand where you are and what you are looking at in another city. I've lived in 4 cities which for me are places of the mind, heart and soul: Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington and London. And I know Dunedin very well from many visits and from my long years of research into the city's architectural history, especially the architecture of Robert Arthur Lawson. In fact, it's very interesting how very often a city's identity, its look, its character can be defined architecturally, not only by its landscape, but by an architect, such as Lawson, or in Christchurch, Mountfort, and for me, Armson. In fact, I'd thought of calling my presentation a farewell to Armson. As I move around the various cities, I am consciously cross-referencing between present encounters and experiences and realities, and known and remembered encounters and experiences registered in my memory bank. The city in history can be read like a book. What I don't know or cannot summon up from my memory bank, I can research in libraries and archives. I can look at documents, photocopies and oral histories. These are all part and parcel of the city as memory. The city as memory is not just the landscape and not just the building. So oral histories and conversations can be particularly enlightening where something has been lost or has changed. In architectural heritage, for example. In the 1980s, there was a rash of books on the lost architectural heritage of various cities. In this city, John Wilson wrote a book on lost Christchurch, the historic buildings of the city that had been destroyed or mutilated or were under threat, the traces of our past in buildings that had faded from memory or were in a degraded, devalued state. Now, there is another book to be written, while the buildings we have lost are still remembered, are still mourned, and can be documented. In the documentary film of the landmark exhibition to Maori art from New Zealand collections, which opened at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 1984 and subsequently toured New Zealand, there is a kaumātua who says of his tūranga waiwai, "This earth is saturated with the tears of our ancestors." In like fashion, the earth on which a city stands is layered and layered and layered with the mostly unremembered traces left by all of its citizens across time. Now, it's these layers that I'm very interested in because they can be peeled back and new understandings of place can emerge from them. You may be wondering what this is doing up on the screen. This is the New Zealander imagined by Lord Macaulay back in 1840. In his imagination, the New Zealander, who was a Maori, was visiting London 1,000 years hence and standing on a ruined arch of London Bridge, contemplating the ruins of St. Paul's. This is a metaphor for the rise and fall of empires. So just had it there to tease you while I was speaking. In Auckland, where I have been working for the past 2.5 years, I am greatly enjoying revisiting the haunts of my Auckland upbringing, reliving some memories and discovering things about Auckland's past that I had never known before. And I'm discovering these things through the process of peeling back the layers. In Karangahape Road earlier this year, I was stopped in my tracks by the refurbishment of what had been a somewhat raffish coffee bar into a smart, more upmarket place. I had remembered the narrow entrance, this narrow entrance off K Road, as being the entrance to a cinema. I can't quite remember, just can't quite get back there in my childhood memory, but I think it might have been called the Vogue in Auckland. It then became a greengrocer's store, and you can see the name. It's probably not very clear in this daylight, but it's named the Norman Ning Building. It was a greengrocer's store on the ground floor. And the original theatre to which the passage led was now approached around the side street, from its original entrance, and it became a live theatre, where, as a schoolboy, I saw the New Zealand Players and Bruce Mason's The End of the Golden Weather, and where the Mercury Theatre was later established, all accessed from the original entrance off K Road, not on K Road. Now, in the centre slide, I don't think you can see it. I think it's a bit indistinct. But the word above on the veranda is lettered in the style of the original, of the time of the original theatre. It just says theatre. The name of the coffee bar is theatre. So that's a reference to one part of its history. On the top, the Norman Ning Building is another part of its history from the 1950s onwards. But the marquee below the lunette, below the semicircular arch, was revealed in the restoration, and the interior of the frame was cleaned back to reveal the faded word Fullers. Now, as an Aucklander, I knew that name. I knew the Fullers had been theatrical entrepreneurs, but I did not know where they had placed their shows. And this is a survivor from the 1920s when this was a vaudeville theatre. I was tremendously excited by that, and this is an example. It will fade. It will fade very quickly, but this is an example of the layers and layers that are there, the detritus that's there waiting to be discovered to tell you something about the place where you live that can be part of your memory and cherished. In Christchurch, for me, a combination of historical knowledge, memory, and intuition come together as I unwrap the past in the present along that stretch of riverbank from the town hall to Gloucester Street. For long, long before Europeans came to these islands, there was a seasonal papakainga where the High Court complex still stands, I think, and there was a burial ground for these people, which was in the sandhills stretching from Cambridge Terrace to Rolleston Avenue. Bishop Harper's sons played with the skeletal remains in the sandhills behind the cottage in which the family lived from the late 1850s onwards. A skeleton was unearthed when the foundations for the YMCA on the corner of Rolleston Avenue and Hereford Street were excavated in the 1980s. And an aquifer which served that community of temporary, seasonal residents, inhabitants, still flows near the site of the Christchurch Art Gallery, which is one of the reasons why the Christchurch Art Gallery takes the name Te Puna o Waifetu, the wellspring of the star-reflecting waters. That gives you some indication that not only was there water there, but it pondered, and it pondered in a way that mirrored the night sky. Very, very beautiful image. Well, a colonial city was layered over this ancient, now largely forgotten settlement. And in its turn, a modern city was layered over the colonial settlement. And now there's an opportunity to build another layer over that. Layer upon layer upon layer will be there to be peeled back as long as it is remembered and retained in the memories of the living. Each generation overlays the previous generation's traces with the marks, traces, meanings and monuments of its own lived time. The city as memory lives. It lives as an embodiment of the past that lives in the present and will live into the future. E nā rangatira, kei te mihi kia koutou katoa no reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa, kia ora.